and welcome back to my channel. My name is Bree Buonomo. Hi if you're new here, or hey if you've been here before. And today we are doing everybody's favorite videos of the year. The worst books that I read in 2022. Today I finally have read through the entirety of 2022 and I have 5 books that I disliked to hated. Truthfully, this year was pretty in the middle. I had a lot of 3-star reads overall. It could be a worse year, but I didn't find a ton of favorites, and I truthfully didn't have a ton of books that I hated, but I did have enough to make this list. So friendly reminder, I just picked the top books that I disliked or hated in the year that I read. So these aren't necessarily new releases or 2022 releases. These are just the books that I read and my thoughts on them. So before I get into the full list, I do have 2 honorable mentions. That would be The Institute by Stephen King and Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. Both of these books, which I don't have a physical copy of Mexican Gothic, but both of these books were almost on the list. Both of these books were lukewarm. They were 3-star reads, and they were just very disappointing at the end. Like, the books themselves were really, really good, and then both of these books took like these weird turns that just completely lost the plot for me. In this one, you follow a group of kids who are in an institute where they are tested for their psychic abilities, which is a really cool plot, and I tend to like these kind of stories, but it just didn't really go anywhere. And then when it finally did, it was so boring and so anticlimactic, and it just felt like Stephen King meandered the entire time of this novel, and then finally was like, oh, it's ending. It was just so unsatisfying, and the more I looked into this, and after discussing with people in book club, the more I found that I didn't like it. With Mexican Gothic, I was so hooked into that book, and I was really enjoying it, and then the plot went from like the creepy unknown Gothic vibes to this is what's happening, this is the reason for all this creepiness, and I didn't really like that. I wish it was a little bit more ambiguous, and I wish the main character didn't know what was causing all these problems, because I think it would have been scarier. So unfortunately I had to give both of these 3 stars, and they would have made the list if I didn't have a couple others that beat them out. Now for the real list. At number 5, I have Who is Vera Kelly by Rosalie Knecht. This book I very recently finished. I finished it on New Year's Eve, and unfortunately, everything that was promised in this book was lackluster. I really expected a very exciting spy novel with the gay background, the child growing up with a problem home and an abusive mother and being queer and not really understanding that. And we got like very little elements of both. This is told in dual timelines where you are following the main character Vera, who in the 60s is a spy for the CIA who is stationed in Argentina and trying to figure out who might be starting a coup in the government and how this might impact like the World War. In the past, you are following Vera as a teenager who is living with her mother. It's an abusive, toxic relationship. Her mother beats her quite often. She verbally assaults her. And at one point, she ends up getting her daughter arrested and sent to an all-girls school, like a boarding school, because her mother just thinks she is a delinquent no matter what she does. That storyline was so compelling, and it was so brief. All those stories were like 2 pages long. The rest of the story was Vera in Argentina, and it was slow and dull, and Vera as a character was just boring to follow along with. It just seemed like this should be better than it was, and I wanted just this girl's life being gay in the 50s and then growing up to have like some more purpose after feeling like she didn't make it anywhere, and I just felt really lackluster about it. So this is why it is at number 5. This next one literally hurts my soul, and that is Blood and Honey by Shelby Mahurin. I actually had to check on Goodreads because I don't even remember this novel. I gave it a 3-star on Goodreads, which I don't feel is accurate, and I also apparently never gave it a review because that's how mad I was about this book. So this is the sequel to Serpent and Dove, which came out in 2019, and I had a very fun time reading it. Serpent and Dove was lighthearted, it was funny, it was comical, it had darker edges, but we never fully went into these darker spaces. It's a story where a witch ends up being betrothed to a witch hunter in order to kind of preserve both of their lives, and they end up finding out that there's more to them than they realized, and that maybe the ways of the church and of the witches is kind of both too extreme. I really like the novel. So I was really excited for Blood and Honey, and it was one of my most anticipated, I think, of 2021 when it came out. I can't remember. I think it was 2020. And I do not remember much about this, except that the author tried to really dig into much deeper topics. I remember that there's like a plot that they have to go try to like reunite the witches and get all the covens together. It was very slow. When I talked about the Institute with Stephen King meandering, I felt like the author meandered with this. This series was originally pitched as a duology, and it shows with this book. This was a filler book. It seemed like there was a small idea that she had for maybe making this a trilogy, and the publisher maybe pushed her to do it. I'm not really sure what happened, but I did not like this. It was not satisfying. It added nothing to the world. It was tempting to be dark, but it didn't really succeed at that. And I just found the plot boring. I didn't want to get through it, which was crazy when I breezed through Serpent and Dove. I would also put Gods and Monsters, the third book, next to this as like a tie for fourth place of my least favorite books. But Gods and Monsters, I felt like got on track a little bit better in the end, but it wasn't enough to save this series as a whole. I did consider getting rid of books 2 and 3 and just keeping one on my shelves. It still might happen if I go through a purge at some point. At number 3 of my least favorite books, I have Dirty Lying Fairies by Sabrina Blackberry. This was an arc that I received on NetGalley, and I thought the premise was interesting. It was fairies, there were changelings involved, there were adult changelings instead of children, and I was like, oh, that sounds kind of fun, and I tend to gravitate towards fairy stories. However, it was not very good, in my opinion. I really felt that this story struggled from trying to mimic the success of other fae books, like The Cruel Prince, like A Court of Thorns and Roses, like even some of the earlier successors like The Iron King. It was trying to capitalize on that, and it did not work. A big problem, I think, with me was the writing and the structure of the novel. There was just a lot of flaws within the writing, and not like grammar wise, I mean like structure and plot wise, where the author would introduce things and topics and then would just drop them and never come back to them. There were a lot of things that were like a mystery element in the book, and the main character never actually solved any mystery. Like they'll introduce the mystery and the main character's like, oh, I have to figure this out, and then someone legit, one of the lines in the book was, oh, you're taking too long to figure this out, so here's the answer. Like every mystery element was just solved by someone telling her the answer, and she didn't do a single thing to earn those solutions. So that annoyed me. The main character is overpowered. The main character in this book reminded me of a Feyre, where she gets turned into a fae and then all of a sudden has all these magical powers, and none of them really made sense to me. Like she was supposed to be a winter fairy. Like she would be like, once you turn, apparently you get sorted into a court. So we have like Harry Potter for the fairies. Like the elements choose you, and she gets turned and immediately gravitates towards the winter court. But then they give her like lightning powers and the power to heal with touch, and like just all these crazy things that make no sense, and there's no like facts in the world to let you know why this is happening. Like, why does she have all these weird things? Like, and why does she have multiple gifts when only fairies, even like the prince and the princesses and the kings and queens, only get like one powerful gift? It just makes no sense. And then the reason for this plot to like happen, like why the courts are in danger, because that's like a subplot, is like the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. And I don't want to spoil it in case anybody is interested in reading this book, but I just couldn't. I could not do it. It just was it was a bad book. I still gave it a 2-star because I finished it. I normally reserve 1 stars for books that like I end up DNFing like after reading a majority, or like just everything in my being detests the book. I didn't detest it, at least I got through the book. But yeah, It was not a fun time. This is one of a very popular bad review of mine on Goodreads. I get a lot of likes on this review, so if you're interested, you can go check it out. Follow me and get my updates when I post them. But I have much more thoughts in depth on Goodreads. At number 2, another book that I just really did not like was The Reyes Incident by Brianna Morgan. This is an indie horror novella, and it was just so lackluster. Everything on this list is essentially lackluster, except for my number 1 spot. This book tried to cram in way too many things for how short the novel was. I either needed it to be a full-length novel, or I just needed the author to pick like 1 or 2 plot points to focus in on and make stronger, because this novel seemed to be all over the place. I think a big part of that, which I talk in my Goodreads review about, was that the chapters just seem to abruptly end and we move on. So like things will like happen in one chapter and we don't ever see the follow-up with that. We're like on to a whole another like week, another month. Like it hops around so much and it just feels so incomplete when that is the case. It's a novella. We shouldn't be losing so much time because it takes away from the impact. I also feel like the characters in this book were just so stupid and things didn't make sense. For a book that follows a police officer, the police officer makes a ton of decisions that would literally jeopardize the lives of so many innocent people. She just wants to like bang this young girl because her wife and her are not doing good or on the verge of a divorce, and she just wants to like bang this hot girl that comes into the station. That's what I'm convinced of, because she literally like gets all like heart eye emojied and just like forgets how to be a police officer and like literally risks people's lives to like make sure that this girl is like innocent. Like this girl reports, so she comes into the police office, she's getting interviewed, and she reports that her friends were killed by mermaids. Everybody else thinks that this girl just went psycho and killed her friends in a bunker and that mermaids aren't real. But this police officer for no reason is like, I believe you. And then like literally like wants to like have a love affair for this girl who is a murder suspect and like tries to like, and it just like hangs on her every word. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me. Like even the setup with the police officer, like this girl is a suspect of murdering 4 of her friends, and they have her up in a hotel, not a jail cell. And they also take several days to get her witness statement. I do not know where the author got her idea of a police procedural, but I've watched enough true crime docs and seen enough like taped evidence to know how an interview works. You are kept in a room that is monitored, completely secluded from other people, and you stay there until your statement is done, or you get put in jail to await further decision if you're suspected of murder. And maybe you make bail, but that didn't happen. Again, she was just put up by the police department to wait in a hotel room where she could have absconded if she was actually the murder suspect. So yeah, I just feel like a lot of this was lackluster. Like I really wish that the book would have focused on maybe like the bait and switch, where this girl is telling a very compelling story about these mermaids being down there, and it ended up maybe being her breaking and actually like murdering her friends, or like maybe there was something else that was involved and she doesn't remember, but she thinks that this is like, I just wanted there to be more of a mystery element, and it was just not it at all. So overall, I can't recommend this book, but I would give the author another try. I believe since I read this book, the author was picked up by a publishing company to have her next book traditionally published. So I have maybe more faith in that. I do think the author could be good with proper editing and resources at her disposal. So I would likely read her traditional published book when it comes out. And here we are, folks. My number 1 least favorite, hated books. I don't even know what to say. Do I hate it? Am I disappointed with it? Do I dislike it? Maybe all the above. Empire of the Vampire by J. Kristoff. God, like this, just look at this book. Like I wanted to like it so much. I got a signed first edition. It has a map inside. Like why? Why did this have to be this way? For somebody who is like goth and like prides himself on being like an author of the night, This book was terrible. So much so that I gave it a 2-star, and I don't think it deserves a 2-star the more I think about this book. I have not been over this book in the last 6 months. I finished it on August 10th. And I still complain about this book to so many people. It's gotta be a 1-star for me, dog. Listen, I don't know. I have a whole vlog on this. So if you want to suffer with me, I'm gonna link it. Go suffer with me. It's a long vlog. It's like an hour long. But like, I need views. So go watch it. Go commiserate with me. I don't know. I understand that some people like this, and I understand some people hate this. It's a very polarizing book. But there's a lot of things I didn't like about this. And it's chunky. And that was part of the issue, is that for how bad this was, I didn't want to wait this long. I did finish it. I read the whole thing. So it deserves the 1-star, I think, in my opinion. There was a lot of things in my vlog that I talked about that I didn't like. This is in a fantasy world, but is it? It's very unclear like what we're looking at and what we're following. Whether this is a high fantasy world completely out of scratch, or if it's like an evolution of Earth. I really didn't know. I had a hard time putting myself where this story was taking place, because then there was also times where like they would fight with swords, but then there was like other modern technology involved. It just seemed like a weird timeline that exists in our world but doesn't exist in our world. And it's like, is it apocalyptic? At one point I thought it might be. I still cannot tell you what this setting is. It really wasn't explained. I really hated the misogyny in this book. It was more apparent to me when I started talking to other people about how bad it was. There's fridging in this book, which was annoying, because I also liked one of the main female characters. I liked her when she was introduced, and I was mad that she died. There was also like white savior complexes. There was a lot of sexism from the characters, which I would be okay with if it was like necessary, but it wasn't. Like a lot of the things set up, like the world building just failed in a lot of places, where like things would be set up but then they wouldn't be carried out in certain situations, or then things wouldn't be like set up and then they would just happen all the time. Oh, also the language in the book, like the language would be modern day. Like the insults that people would say did not fit the context that the rest of the world was like in. And then the vampires, I still don't understand like the whole vampire plotline. Like, where did they come from? Why were they there? Why were they killing people? What was their motive? We don't know. We have this half vampire pissed off main character the whole time that was so grumpy, and by the end he just really annoyed me. There were so many female characters that were just killed in this book. Like, I like a very big diverse group of characters, and I think like you can have very good men and women characters that can add to the plot, and the women added nothing to the plot other than motivation to make this main character miserable. That is fridging, and that is stupid. I hated it. And I really wanted to like it so much, because I really love vampire stories. Modern vampire stories have yet to like really hook me in for the most part. And I really thought like this was going to be like the epic book that I was excited for, and it was not. So I don't know. I'm not going to rant anymore. I have a whole video to do that. Please go watch it. Go have a time and suffer with me. So now that my blood is boiled again from talking about Empire of the Vampire, I am going to end it here. Those were my top 5 least favorite to worst books of 2022, and 2 honorable mentions of books that I just didn't care for and almost made the list. Let me know what books that you didn't like or hated in 2022. Were any on my list yours of 2022 or before? Because I know not all of these were published in 2022. Let me know, and stick around, guys, because my next video will be my favorite books of 2022. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you then. Bye!